Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A federal appeals court has struck down voting restrictions in North Carolina, saying they disproportionately affected African Americans. In the ruling, the three-judge panel from the Fourth Circuit Court wrote, quote, "The new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision," unquote. The law had been challenged by the Justice Department, the North Carolina NAACP, and other civil rights groups after its passage in 2013 limited the forms of ID acceptable at polling places and restricted how people could register. As a result, about 5% of the state's registered voters, primarily African American, would have been excluded from being able to cast a ballot. This is Bob Hall, Executive Director of Democracy North Carolina, speaking on Democracy Now! About how the rules affect North Carolina's presidential primaries earlier this year.
You could see that with same-day registration, we had over 8,000 voters able to vote, able to use same-day registration. That is, they were not registered, but they showed up during early voting, and they were able to use that provision to vote. It's disproportionately African-American, disproportionately young people. They want to get rid of that.
Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned similar election laws there, finding they disenfranchised voters of color and were tailored to benefit the Republican politicians who enacted them. U.S. District Judge James Peterson wrote in his opinion, quote, "The Wisconsin experience demonstrates that a preoccupation with mostly phantom election fraud leads to real incidents of disenfranchisement, which undermine rather than enhance confidence in elections, particularly in minority communities," unquote. Peterson did not overturn a photo ID provision for voters in the state, but called the current system for issuing IDs a wretched failure that predominantly affects African Americans and Latino citizens. On Friday, a court also ruled against Republican voting laws in Kansas, where a county judge said the state must count votes cast by people who registered without providing citizenship documents. Those decisions all come a week after a similar ruling against a voter ID law in Texas. We'll have more on the rulings after headlines. In election news, Khizr and Ghazala Khan, the parents of a U.S. soldier who died serving in Iraq, are denouncing Donald Trump, who attacked them following Khizr's speech at the Democratic National Convention. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has continued to argue that NATO has become obsolete. Speaking to ABC's George Stephanopoulos Sunday, Trump said NATO had been unable to stop Russia's annexation of Crimea last year. Trump also said that if elected, he might formally recognize Russia's takeover of Crimea.
I saw him. He was, very emotional and probably looked like a nice guy to me. His wife, if you look at his wife, she was standing there. She had nothing to say. Maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say. You tell me, but plenty of people have written that.
Some Democratic Party officials have suggested Russia's behind the release of Democratic Party emails in an effort to help sway the election to Trump, but no evidence to back the claim has been provided. In Flint, Michigan, 6 more state employees are facing criminal charges in connection with the lead poisoning of Flint's water. The 6 work for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. They're accused of having tried to cover up the problem of lead contamination in Flint's water once state officials became aware of it. This is Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette.
Some people failed to act. Others minimized harm done and arrogantly chose to ignore data. Some intentionally altered figures and covered up significant health risks. Two companies committed fraud and were negligent and made a bad situation worse.
3 other state and city officials also face felony charges in the case. Flint's lead poisoning began last year when an unelected emergency manager appointed by Michigan Governor Rick Snyder switched the source of the city's drinking water to the corrosive Flint River. Today, the water in Flint is still poisoned and unsafe to drink. The former head of booking at Fox News says former CEO Roger Ailes sexually harassed her for 2 decades. Ailes resigned last week amidst multiple claims of sexual harassment. Lori Loon told New York Magazine that Fox News knew about the harassment and helped cover it up. Loon said the harassment amounted to psychological torture and ruined her life. Loon called Ailes a predator and said her duties included luring young female Fox employees into one-on-one situations with Ailes that she knew could result in harassment. In international news, hundreds of residents of the Syrian city of Aleppo demonstrated and burned tires Sunday to protest the ongoing siege by Syrian government forces and their allies. The demonstration took place shortly before rebels fighting the Syrian government began a new offensive to break the siege. The UN says about 250,000 civilians are trapped in the rebel-held portion of Aleppo and facing a worsening humanitarian situation. Rebel-held areas of Aleppo have been surrounded by government forces since last month and subjected to heavy aerial bombardment, including the destruction of a number of hospitals. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange says the group has released information about Hillary Clinton's campaign. This comes after WikiLeaks released 20,000 DNC emails revealing how the Democratic Party favored Hillary Clinton and worked behind the scenes to discredit and defeat Bernie Sanders. DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigned as a result of the leaks. 2 Canadians were rearrested on Friday, just hours after the Supreme Court of British Columbia cleared them of terrorism charges. Civil liberties groups hailed the ruling that freed John Nuttall and Amanda Cardy after a judge declared federal police had entrapped them. It was the first time entrapment has been successfully used as a defense in a terrorism prosecution in North America. Civil rights groups accuse the FBI of similarly entrapping terrorism suspects in the U.S. But on Friday, Nuttall and Cardy were rearrested on a peace bond, a Canadian law that allows authorities to monitor or detain people who it thinks may commit a crime. Here in the U.S., the Baltimore City Council will decide next month whether to increase the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour. The council's Labor Committee voted 4-0 last week to send the bill to the 15-member council. Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake has said she would sign the bill if it reaches her desk. Baltimore is the latest jurisdiction nationwide to consider an increase. Washington, D.C., Seattle, and San Francisco have approved increases to $15 an hour. California and New York have approved statewide increases to $15. Baltimore workers are presently subject to the state minimum wage, which is $8.75 an hour. A judge publicly reprimanded jail officials in Louisville, Kentucky Friday after they sent a woman into her courtroom with no pants on last week. The woman said she was arrested in a county 80 miles away on a bench warrant for not completing a shoplifting intervention course in 2014. The woman said she had been in jail since Sunday, 5 days before she appeared in the courtroom of Judge Amber Wolf.
The jail would also refuse to give her pants and any kind of hygiene products that she needed.
No pants? What?
I've been wearing this since I came in with this on Sunday.
Excuse me?
Other hygiene products that she greatly needed and requested. So she's been...
Excuse me? This is outrageous. Is this for real?
Was Judge Wolf, who then called officials at the Jefferson County Jail directly from the courtroom on her phone and reprimanded them. The woman also told Wolf other women in the jail had received similar treatment. In more election news, Khizr and Ghazala Khan, the parents of the U.S. soldier who died serving in Iraq, are denouncing Donald Trump, who attacked them following Khizr's speech at the Democratic National Convention. This is Khizr Khan speaking Thursday night in Philadelphia at the DNC.
Donald Trump, you're asking Americans to trust you with their future. Let me ask you, have you even read the United States Constitution? I will gladly lend you my copy.
That was Khizr Khan speaking on stage of the DNC beside his wife, Ghazala Khan. Their son, U.S. Army Captain Humayun Khan, was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star. And Sunday was the first anniversary of the murder of Mexican journalist Ruben Espinosa. On July 31, 2015, Espinosa was killed by gunmen in an apartment in Mexico City, alongside human rights activist Nadia Vera and 3 other women. No one has been charged in their murders. It's widely believed that Espinosa and Vera were targeted as a result of their work in the southern state of Veracruz. This is Ruben's sister, Alba Espinosa, speaking on Sunday.
My brother Ruben was a photojournalist who loved his work, and he was a very humane person. We aren't insisting their assassination was planned from Veracruz, but we do want this line of investigation to be pursued related to Ruben's work and Nadia's activism, since they both had suffered harassment in Zaclapa, and we also want them to investigate this since, apart from him, they have killed many journalists in the state of Veracruz. There are so many who have died, and no one pays attention. They are killing them, and no one does anything.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.